I don't show this in the video, but the paper is pre-wet in that one rectangle. And we're just using Wet and Wet, which I think everybody who's painted watercolor has done before. And we're using this as kind of a control to see how it differs from the other techniques that we're going to discover. On this technique, we're starting off with a gradated wash just to put some tone on the paper. And this paper was also pre-wet, so I'm just letting color float down from dark to light. While this is still damp, we're going to take a paper towel, or in this case Kleenex, because these are painted fairly small samples, and we're just going to blot. And we're going to end up using two different ways to blot. This is a dry Kleenex, just crumpled up into a kind of a ball. And I'm just trying to get those soft, kind of lacy edges. And now I'm using a damp Kleenex. I took and balled one up, and now it's damp. It'll make a little softer edge, just slightly. And it's a good way to control what's happening. By using this technique, you can re-wet part of it and go ahead and blot again. It's quite forgiving in that way. I know that sounds like an oxymoron for watercolor, but you can control this fairly easily, and it's got a pretty good look to the for the edges of cloud shapes. As you can see, I've spattered on the paper. I've sprinkled or spattered clear water, and you're not going to know when you touch that, but when you put color on, it's going to be a random pattern, and it's going to kind of explode when the pigment hits the drops of water, so it's going to have a much different look than the previous examples that we've done before. By the way, all these techniques, and there's certainly more than 7, can all be used with one another. You could certainly blot, you could certainly lift, you could certainly spatter, you could certainly do a lot of these. I wouldn't recommend doing all of them in one painting, but you can get an idea of whatever the effect is that you're after. You don't have to be stuck with just one. You can use several of these together for your desired results. here I am actually blotting a few places after this, so this is a combination of techniques. I'm just using, in this example, the tip of my brush to separate and to make these small little light sparkles or patterns. Here, I know you can't see it, but I'm painting in clear water on the blank paper, and this is called a water shape. That's what I'm calling it. Anyway, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint around that water shape with negative painting, and it's going to touch in some places, and you can see it start to explode into its own pattern. So this is going to give a different look that I don't know how else you would I don't know how else you'd do it. It's already giving a little different look than the previous examples, and it looks like rays of light coming through or something. So you don't know what you're going to get, but boy, when it works, it works. So in a very short amount of time, we have similar patterns. We're painting the same thing, so we can compare them all to each other, the same designs, but we have 4 different looks. Some of these can be combined or not, depending on your preferences. This is going to be a little different look, and you have you have permission to use gouache. Anyway, we're painting the same wet and wet sky, the very first one that we did, except we're going to go back into it with white paint or gouache or opaque watercolor. And I'm using, as you can see, I'm using a porcelain serving sauce dish, and it seems to work very well because we're only using 2 colors. We're using cerulean blue in this case. It doesn't make any difference what it is. It's a 1 color painting, and later on we'll be using another color, which is neutral tint. So here I'm just doing a little lifting, doing a little housework, creating a little edge, so on and so forth. And I want to have some value change on here to give it some depth, so that's what I'm adding now. And then I'm going to go back after this and paint over it while it's still damp with gouache. I'm using Dr. Martin's bleed-proof white. You can use any thing out of the tube, titanium white, Chinese white. It doesn't make any difference. I just want to see what happens with these edges when I'm using this white body paint or opaque against this transparent watercolor. It's quite fun, and it's quite controllable, which I know a lot of you would be interested in. So we're just taking the same painting we did the first time, just the wet and wet, which I think everybody pretty much has done, and we've added, in this case, we've added white gouache to it. You could certainly use colored gouache if you were doing sunsets or different examples, but with the paper being damp and not dry, it creates a much better believable edge. This one we're using a gradated wash, dark at the top, lighter at the bottom, and I'm doing a random gradated wash, or graded wash this time, because I'm setting it up to paint over it later. We have to do an underpainting, if you will, before we can paint over it. And what I'm trying to do is to give this little demonstration, this little example, some depth. So we're looking through that top layer, which we'll paint in a few seconds, and we're also going to use a different technique. This is taking advantage of the dry paper, and it's also taking advantage of the texture in the paper, which is 140-pound cold press. You can get more by using rough if you want, but this gives a more graphic style. The edges are harder, the separation is more pronounced, but you can see by doing that graded wash at the top being a slightly darker, that seems to go off the page, and I'm looking at the white a little above the middle, going across the middle, kind of sort of, to light it up. And as you can see, I'm using a blot, and I'm using a little lift and a little soften edge techniques, which you can use in any of these. So this gives a different look, and that's kind of what we're after. So now we have multiple ways to achieve our goal. In this example, I'm going to show you a little different way to, a little different sky, I mean, to use an example of underpainting and drying and re-wetting, to show you an example of how this might look and the timing of it to create, number one, the gradated washes using more than one color, and also being able to re-wet the paper once it's completely dry to add another layer of depth to our painting. I'm going to repeat the same process on the right-hand side, so you'll have something to compare to the underpainting, if you will, the before and after, and the final painting using a variety of edges and values. You should let this dry completely before you attempt to re-wet, otherwise you're just going to be picking up paint. So as you can see, I'm using a large brush. I just used a large brush, and I made very few strokes across that top section. All I want to do is re-wet the paper so I can continue to control my edges by being softer than wet on dry. I'm using different values to achieve that depth, and although this looks dark at the moment, as you know with watercolor, it's going to dry back much lighter. And that was where I was using the neutral tint with the cerulean blue, and it's a great combination for doing this study. I thought my brush was clean there, and it wasn't, so I wiped it off with a Kleenex, and as you can see, that wipe produced another an effect that we didn't cover yet, but the wipe or the blot, it's similar, except I'm wiping now, and that's a very effective technique as long as you don't overdo it, and you're confident. That sky was painted in very few strokes, 10 or 12 strokes at the most. It's a perfect example of how to let a watercolor paint itself. Painting skies is a fabulous way. It's a great way to learn how to paint watercolor, because it's all about timing, edges, wet, moist, damp, dry, and consistency of pigment, how it's going to dry out. I'm just adding some value shapes so I can control the depth of this painting, and darker is forward, lighter colors recede. I was trying to take advantage of the rough paper there, and I had my brush too wet, so this is a little better result what I'm doing right now. And you could just leave this alone. This is your little study, and it all came from the one on the left, setting it up. All I'm going to do now is to just show you a couple of things that you can add to it to complete your painting. And at this point, if I don't like something, I can use gouache, I can use anything to paint over it, make it bigger, smaller, take it out. So this is my design phase. To me, design is everything. So if it doesn't work here, this cloud up here is very important, balancing this. Excuse me, the cloud up to the right side, upper right, is very important. Here I'm using a little bit of white gouache body paint, and by that wipe with the Kleenex, my light is coming from the right hand side. I've established that, and now I can put in a couple of little details, and that'll complete my study. It's a study for me, it's not a painting. So anyway, that takes some of the pressure off if it's only a study. While I'm in here with this dark paint, I'm just going to add a couple of rocks in the foreground just to give it some interest. And then I'm going to, because the light's coming from the right hand side, I'm going to use a little bit of white gouache again, and just give the rocks a little bit of a highlight, and then we're done. We can do many more of these. They don't take very long. They're very quick to do. I highly advise that you work out your issues doing these before you start a complete painting. Well, here's a look at the examples that we've been painting the last few minutes. I hope you can see the differences and how you could combine these styles with each other to make an exceptional painting. Thanks for watching.